It's another edition of the program Frontier Opening Bell. Thank you for joining us on Temple Oshaju. We've got Ali Kansajo of Rich Frontiers in Nairobi. Thank you for coming through. Joshua, DPC, banking analyst with Better Wealth Management Capital. Thank you for coming through as well. Bosun Amafaye, executive editor here at Frontier Africa Reports. I appreciate your presence. We look at the markets now, where Nigeria was down yesterday, Tuesday, after the holidays, was down opened the week lower by 39 basis points lower. The PRVM Stock Exchange in Cote d'Ivoire was also down by 36 basis points. The Egyptian Stock Exchange marginally moved higher, inched up to 0.06%. And of course, the Nairobi Stock Exchange went down as well by 52 basis points, while you have the Johannesburg Stock Exchange rising by more than 1% on Tuesday after the holidays. East African headlines now. It's IMF week and of course the World Bank Group. So we're beginning to see a lot of stories coming out of the spring meetings going on in Washington and of course virtually. Challenges to financial stability will remain on virus, limited fiscal support. That's as it relates to eastern parts of Africa and of course I think specifically Kenya. You have US, the United States also reviewing bilateral agreement with Kenya. Kenya is to suspend the passenger flights to and from UK come April the 9th. That's this Friday. KCB Group is to buy out Las Barras, Rwanda. You have Tanzania banking units as well, all on the radar for KCB Group purchase. And you have Tanzania naming Eric Hamis as the new Director General for its port authority again. We've missed you on the show. Ali, let's have your take on all of these headlines because you'll be able to give us deeper analysis.
Good morning and thank you. Good to see you again, Temple, and everybody on the show. So yes, the IMF, of course, have given Kenya a 3-year package over $2 billion. They've also released immediately a sum of cash of about 12 to 15% of the total loan amount to address the pandemic. There are some terms and conditions in that agreement that have created a hullabaloo here in Nairobi, as everybody's been discussing some of the conditionalities attached to that loan. The IMF yesterday, of course, released their World Economic Update and had Kenya as the second fastest growing African country from what I could see. I thought that was a little bit optimistic because we're still in this on-off shutdown scenario, although the president is trying to avoid a shutdown and just go for the curfew. Numbers spiked quite high in the last couple of weeks, but now seem to be trending lower. But, you know, the main point I would take away is, and by the way, they cited Kenya as being in potentially high debt distress, which is pretty strong language out of the IMF. Now, the point I would take away is, you know, in the current situation where you have a very uncertain Ethiopia, linchpin state in the region, I think geoeconomically, Kenya was able to leverage the situation and get the support. This will also allow Kenya to go to the Eurobond markets where it's said that they're looking for $1 billion and €1 billion. And given what we saw out of Ghana, I think that will be a relatively easy call with the IMF support. US reviewing the bilateral agreement with Kenya. This was, you know, Trump was the great bilateralist. And he had pushed this bilateral trade deal with Kenya. And I think the Biden administration under Secretary Blinken, who I must say has been a breath of fresh air, a lot of moral clarity, less transactional. But obviously that will undergo a review process. Of course, your next story touches on Kenya's relationship with the United Kingdom. They signed a 25-year free trade agreement, but then, there's been a major diplomatic spat. It started with the United Kingdom putting Kenya on the red list. This was made a lot of the people at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs very unhappy. So it seems that all flights are being cut from April 9th. I think once cooler heads prevail, it's such an important relationship for Kenya. Just to talk about it, we export vegetables, we export tea there. Well, 1/3 of our inward remittances come from Kenyans living in the United Kingdom. So I think once things calm down, we should normalize relatively quickly. But it's a mechanistic process Britain has, and our numbers have gone up quite considerably, in part because of the border situation with Tanzania, where until now we had a COVID denialist there. KCB to buy Atlas Mara's Rwanda and Tanzanian banking units. Look, I think, there's not much left. It's a shell, Atlas Mara, essentially. They had big hopes, did not get very far, frankly. And I think KCB is just doing a bit of consolidation. KCB reported full year results, but fell behind Equity Bank, which has now reported more than £1 trillion on the asset side. And finally, Tanzania names Eric Hamis as the new DG of the Ports Authority. This is a very important geo-economic piece of the puzzle in Tanzania, and it's the new president making her mark. I mean, she fired the previous guy pretty promptly, and she's obviously come forward with a replacement. I think people are excited by the new president. Not only is she a lady, but she seems to be setting out her own stall. She's set up a committee to look into COVID, which I think has been a big problem in Tanzania. And she's released, there was a very big clampdown on media. She's looking at that as well. So I think there's a lot of optimism, and investors should keep an eye on this lady. She seems pretty sharp to me.
Thank you for this wonderful analysis, Ali. Bosin, any editorial considerations on these headlines before we move to West Africa?
Not really. I just wanted to ask Ali for just about 30 seconds, if you could explain why the angst so much on social media in terms of analysts and everyone trying to dissect this IMF package with the Kenyatta's administration. What's the angst all over about who gets what, in particular the state-owned enterprises that seem to be at the heart of the debate?
So there are two issues here. I think, if you analyze it, the commentary, first of all, is extremely unhappy with the amount of debt that the Kenyatta administration has taken on during its term. So there is a great deal of unhappiness about that in particular. People like David Ndii, who's probably the most well-known economist here in Kenya outside the central bank, basically was predicting that the IMF was coming in, calling them a receiver manager, and saying that, we haven't got much of a choice. So this thing has been coming at us. The unhappiness in general is around the debt load. Previously we had a very cautious Thatcherite, Mr. Kibaki, who was very cautious about every shilling he spent. And the feeling here was that there was a great deal of over expenditure. The specific issue you were asking about, Barson, was regarding state-owned enterprises, and it seems the IMF are saying you've got $350 million to sort this out. Now, this includes Kenya Power, Kenya Airways. Kenya Airways itself, the CEO was talking about needing exactly that amount, which would mean there's very little left over. More than that, the IMF was telling the government, you've got to look at privatizing some of these parastatals. And I think that's got people also quite excited. Kenya Ports Authority is very valuable. You could sell more Safaricom, for example, and reduce your debt. So that's the contours of the debate. But, we have a lively discussion here in Kenya. Thankfully, there's free speech. You can say what you want.
Thanks a great deal for that, Ali. And of course, the question coming from you, Bosin. Let's now move on to the Western African headlines before us. IMF says that emerging markets, low income and developing countries are to suffer greater after effects of COVID-19, unlike the GFC of 2008. That's the financial downturn of 2008. Still, IMF now on Nigeria specifically saying that the economy is to recover by some 2.5% in 2021 and of course 2.3% in 2022. Tullow Oil starts new drilling program offshore Ghana. Oriole Resources gets 51% stake in Reservior Minerals Camerooon, and Tieto Mineral targets some 200,000 tons of gold in Cote d'Ivoire flagship project. As a banking analyst, Joshua, what do you make of the headlines and, of course, comments or analysis that have been released lately by the IMF?
Thank you, Temple. What I'll say is that it's very encouraging for once to see the IMF upwardly revising their economic outlooks for Nigeria. It was 1.5% in January. Now they've upped it to 2.5%. So maybe they're a little bit more optimistic, based obviously on the fact that our Q4 numbers for 2020 were a bit more encouraging, I think, than some were expecting. They didn't expect us to come out of the recession so quickly. So that probably factored into why they expect probably higher economic growth in 2021. Why it's then going to decline in 2022, I'm not entirely sure. But I think we can also, boil it down to the fact that our vaccine rollout has been fairly steady. I mean, it's not nationwide at yet. It's still just in, your Lagos and your Abuja and a few other pockets here and there. But there's still been a very impressive rollout, let's say. And I think that is giving people encouragement that we will see somewhat of a return to full economic activity at some point this year, which would definitely encourage the economic growth that the IMF is predicting. Now, overall, I think what's really interesting is that globally, I think the US has just crossed the milestone of 115 million vaccine doses being given out. I think we're seeing a pretty steady rollout, and I think that this is definitely going to encourage economic activity going forward. A lot of people have, earmarked sort of the middle of the year, June, July, for when we start to see herd immunity in some of these communities. And so I definitely think that things will start to pick up globally, and this will be very encouraging for us with regards to oil demand. Hopefully that would see a little bit more of a bump in oil demand if OPEC are able to stick to the cuts, or even if they loosen them a little bit, we should still be able to see more volumes and a better price, a more stable price, which should help our economy, overall. But those are encouraging signs overall.
Right. Thanks a great deal for those comments from you, Joshua. Bosun, over to you.
Yes, I think the biggest news we'll get so far this week will be the IMF and the World Bank. The Global Financial Stability Report was released yesterday. A whole lot more about the climate change, climate adaptation emergency story also came out from the AFDB yesterday, and a whole number of African heads of state and government spoke, and including World Bank, the IMF, and the United Nations Secretary General. So there's a whole lot of busy economic data this week, and we can see that coming through into the oil prices because of economic data that came out of the UK, US, and China, and India PMI as well. The concerns about the virus and the vaccine distribution is still there. There's a whole lot about concerns that we should take on board. Jobs is still one major issue that the World Bank and the IMF putting out in their report. There'll be a major press conference this morning at about 2 o'clock Nigerian time by David Malpass, the World Bank president. So there are concerns about job, about number of millions of people who will go into extreme poverty between now and 1 or 2 years down the line because of the pandemic. It's not Uhuru yet, but I think we should give the Nigerian government, and I think the central bank and a few other agencies of the government, some part of the back for helping Nigeria to escape. In fact, folks will think that by now Nigeria will be swimming in red. But from 1.5% forecast in January to April, and you're now looking at 2.5%, Kenya is the outlier. 7.6% beats Nigeria hands down. If you take that to the EPL, Kenya got the World Cup. That's just what it means. Got the EPL. Nigeria is flatly beaten. Even Egypt beaten to 2.5%. South Africa beaten to 3.1%. So I don't know what those guys in Kenya are doing behind, and they are fighting over the IMF $2.5 billion. Ali should know. But I think you guys should drink some glasses over there. I think we'll have some nice party here in Nigeria as well. And I think those measures taken by the central bank last year and the government seem to have mitigated. Look at the numbers coming from other companies listed on the stock exchange, like Caverton Helicopter and some of the insurance companies. You'll see that it looks like somehow we're able to manage, we're better at fire brigade economic management rather than doing things the normal way. So my fear is that when things get back to normalcy, will still be able to handle things very well and maintain and keep the momentum. That's on Nigeria's side. Look at the Ghanaian. The Tullow Oil is digging furiously in our backyard, despite the fact that oil is going out of business perhaps in our lifetime or thereafter. So we need to keep an eye on these developments as well, Temple.
Thank you so much, Bosin. Now let's cross over to the Southern African markets headline, where you've got the debt higher, and of course, SDR representing special drawing rights. Now the support there, and of course, vaccine. All of these put together, topping the discussions that are ongoing at the World Bank and of course IMF spring meetings at this point. Namibia's got the IMF approval for its 3.9 billion Namibian dollar loan facility that came through with a quote. Remember, they requested for that a couple of weeks ago. G4S in Botswana, that company is to sell its subsidiary, G4S Facility Management, by June this year. Caledonia ups dividend again, says $67 million. Central shafts now operational. You've got Nkudezi Energy saying that solar project in Mozambique is actually on tap, despite all of the insecurity and insurgency that is ongoing in that country. Let me hear your thoughts on these headlines, especially the IMF side of things, Ali, before getting the understanding of both and about them.
Yes, so I think the IMF report had South Africa growing reasonably after this pandemic recession. I was impressed that South Africa are importing the Pfizer vaccine because as you can see, it was rolled out very successfully in Israel, where the numbers have completely crashed to practically nothing. So I think that was a smart bit of business on the South African side to identify that vaccine and to order it in. So that gives me more encouragement about the scenario that might unfold there. But obviously, we've still got a debt issue in South Africa, and that will remain a challenge, trying to keep South Africa on a sustainable debt trajectory. Namibia, the IMF has approved the facility. That's positive news. If I can just touch on the solar project in Mozambique and just mention two things. Yesterday, I was looking at the currency. The currency is the best, the Metical is the best performing currency in the world. It's up about 13% against the dollar. And that's against the backdrop of two things. One, this massive insurgency in Cabo Delgado, the exit of Total, whether it's temporary or permanent, we're finding out. But this has been a phenomenon just on the currency because the bonds are trading around 10.7%. But I thought it was interesting that the best performing currency in the world today is the Metical.
I didn't even realize that before.
Yes, as music to Joshua's ears. I'm sure if Joshua knew, he would have put some. Instead of chasing Naira dollar here, he would have put some of his assets in Mozambique.
Interesting.
But now he won't bother about what happened to whether Nigeria Central Bank flows the Naira or not. Isn't it, Joshua?
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the thing about it is you all have to do with your level of risk tolerance. And Mozambique is not one of those countries that comes to mind when you're thinking about currency and currency trading. So that one definitely flew under the radar.
It's better to think more Pan-African these days. You never can tell who's making money. For Ali to know, I'm sure Ali knows. You can give Ali a call after the show this morning. Ali knows where the bread is buttered.
Interesting. Well, Bosun, any thoughts on these headlines before we finish off with the Northern African headlines?
Yeah, let's go to North Africa, please.
Great. So you got Misa Fertilizers looking to pay out a 2020 cash dividend of some over 801 million Egyptian pounds. ADNOC and ADQ are to acquire Egypt's Wataniya Petroleum Company in the second quarter of this year. You've got MLF Finance raising capital to 200 million Egyptian pounds, and they now high some 200 billion Egyptian pounds in terms of portfolio again. Atidari Leasing reports some 6.5% decline to 3.2 million dinars. That's for the 2020 financial year. And of course, in Morocco, you got Renault naming Mohamed Benani as its managing director. Ali, we're back to you.
These are very technical headlines. Let me just talk about Egypt first. I mean, you know, again, Egypt was one of the few African countries to grow last year. Let's not forget that. That was a singular achievement. I saw that the IMF report was reasonably bullish about them as well. I remain bullish. There's some concern about the strength of the currency, but you know, I'm not as concerned. And I think one of the best trades, if we're looking at trades across the continent, is to run the carry trade into the Egyptian pound and take the interest on it, because I think they'll manage the currency going forward. ADNOC and ADQ, of course, are Abu Dhabi, acquiring Egypt's Wataniya Petroleum company. You know, the point to make about Abu Dhabi and the UAE, it's a strong supporter of General Sisi, President Sisi. They are big players across our region, East and the Horn of Africa, and it again speaks to their ability to deploy capital, you know, very, very easily.
Thanks a great deal for those contributions, Ali. Joshua, I mean, we know that the IMF meeting is on. Can you share with us your considerations and any further expectations, I mean, you have from these multilateral meetings going on?
Well, I just think that overall, you know, the state of the global economy and especially emerging and frontier markets will be, you know, at the forefront of their thinking. But I think, first of all, I want to say the reason why, you know, we saw such great success in Egypt, and I'll continue to harp on about this, is the fact that they acted very, very quickly. They moved quickly to liberalize their currency and to make their economy conducive for foreign investors. And that is really the secret sauce. It's that simple and it's that straightforward. And if we were able to replicate that, we wouldn't be in this kind of situation right now, honestly. But I think the truth is there's still room for correction. We can still make a difference and, you know, change path or change course. But unfortunately, I doubt that this current Nigerian administration is really focused on doing that. But the blueprint is very simple. You know, the longer you continue to hold on to your currency, the more difficult you make it for these international organizations to offer any kind of help. The IMF have already said it, that they have taken a position, they've taken a stance, and they will not move from that because they have no reason to. So we are just going to have to continue to suffer through this slow recovery for as long as it takes until something miraculous happens one way or another.
Interesting. Thanks a great deal for that contribution, Joshua. Boston, any final words? 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, very, very interesting again, because it's exactly a year ago that Nigeria applied for $7 billion from the IMF, 3.4 billion, 2.5 billion from the World Bank, and $1 billion from the AFDB. To date, we only got about, in August last year, we got $3.4 billion from the IMF for the COVID-19 support. The budgetary support that we requested for a year ago, the World Bank has not said a word to Nigeria. The program was to be reviewed in June, July. It was pushed to October. There was no word from the World Bank until now. Then towards the end of last year, there was a new 4-year or 5-year program, 2021 to 2024, I guess, a comprehensive program with Nigeria, with the World Bank unveiled. There's no word about this budgetary support, which was split into two, I think about $1.5 billion in 2 tranches. We haven't gotten it 12 years down the line. For the AFDB, not a word has been said about this request for $1 billion funding budgetary support. A year now, that tells a whole lot about the fact that Nigeria is being cleverly snubbed. And like Joshua put it, look, until you put your house in order in specific areas and undress in public and you're ready to meet certain conditions, as the Kenyans are discussing right now, you're not going to get anything.
Thanks a great deal for those judgments, editorial considerations from you, Bosun Omofaya, Executive Editor here at Frontier Africa Reports. Your rich analysis from the Rich Frontiers Management in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you, Ali Kansachu, for all of those. Joshua WC, appreciate your inspiration, your insights on the show this morning. This has been Frontier Opening Bell for this Wednesday midweek edition. I'm Temple Ashaju. Thank you, gentlemen, for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.